Marquise Lee is awesome, but he needs some help. Mark Rogers TV looking at the USC wide receiver issue, much like Michigan State's issue at running back in trying to replace Le'Veon Bell and his 382 carries. Much can be said about Robert Woods' departure to the Buffalo Bills and the NFL at USC. Here's the situation. Of course, you've got Marquise Lee, possibly the best wide receiver in college football, at that number one position. Lockdown. Hopefully he stays healthy. 118 receptions last season, 1,721 yards, and 14 touchdowns. He actually was the number two guy to Woods' number one slot in 2011. Then they kind of switched last season as Woods took a step back and Lee emerged as the number one playmaker at that position in college football with those gaudy statistics, despite losing Matt Barkley in the UCLA game for the last 8 or 10 minutes. So Marquise Lee without Barkley for the remainder of that game, also in the Notre Dame game and in the Sun Bowl against Georgia Tech, or Marquise Lee probably catches 130 passes. Well, it was probably a blessing in disguise because this season Max Wittek will probably win the starting job at USC. We're guessing at this point. Of course, they've got to go through the next 2 or 3 weeks of drills to decide. But Max Wittek, quarterback USC in place of Barkley at the end of the game against UCLA, Notre Dame, and Georgia Tech. And he's worked well, we understand, with Marquise Lee throughout the spring and the summer sessions now into the fall. Marquise Lee, you don't hear this much out of a wide receiver, but with the departure of Woods and especially Barkley and some leaders on defense, Marquise Lee has stepped up as a leader. Certainly this spring, we understand there at USC. He is definitely the face of this football program. But after Marquise Lee, it is super thin at USC. Let's run it down. And we talked about Robert Woods stepping back, not being the playmaker that he was previously in 2012. Well, he still caught 846 yards worth of passes for 11 touchdowns. So he will definitely be missed. You've got Nelson Agholor. He is definitely the number 2 guy on the depth chart during the first week of fall drills. Caught 19 for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns as a freshman in 2012. He's a rare athlete in that he's got game-breaking ability, but at the same time, they say he's a technician. He runs routes really well, knows the game, can read the secondary. Nelson Agholor is the number 2 wide receiver at USC. He was the 6th rated wide receiver according to ESPNU coming out of high school, Tampa, Florida, in 2011. Okay, this is where it gets thin. Trying to fill out that number 3 slot and also the 4 wide receiver position in those formations on 3rd and long. George Farmer out already. He was supposed to be the 3rd wide receiver. Then USC received terrible news the first week of June 6th, when Steven Michell, the 11th rated wide receiver coming out of high school, tore ligaments. This guy was supposed to be a game breaker, and the playing time was right there for him to take in 2013. But Steven Michell, he will be out for the rest of the season, just like George Farmer. Okay, here are the candidates. You've got Victor Blackwell. Victor Blackwell caught 1 pass last season, but he is in line to be USC's number 3 wide receiver. He redshirted in 2011. We mentioned the 1 catch in 2012. And Victor Blackwell had a great spring. Not just his spring game numbers, but an excellent spring. He seized the opportunity. He's obviously filled the gap and improved himself and says, I want to be the guy in that 3rd spot. Victor Blackwell caught 7 for 155 and 1 touchdown in USC's spring game. You also have another freshman in Darreus Rogers, who's an early entry into the USC program. So he's been practicing with the team since December. He was the 29th rated wide receiver coming out of high school, according to Rivals.com. So Darreus Rogers, not a top-end talent, but certainly he has a huge opportunity to make himself prominent in the USC passing game. Darreus Rogers, a top-end athlete, coming into the USC program as well. Then you've got a senior, and this speaks to the USC wide receiver situation. Devon Flourney, he's a senior. He has 1 pass reception career. Devon Flourney, he has an opportunity, and he is battling for that number 3 wide receiver spot. USC, this is the situation. Probation And the reduction in scholarships has taken its toll across the board. We typically think along the lines, offensive and defensive line depth, but it takes its toll right here. When Farmer gets knocked out and now Mitchell tears ligaments, that USC only has 5 scholarship athletes at wide receiver. 5. They typically hit us with 6 or 8 wide receivers who could start for almost any team in the country. That's what it looks like at USC. Love to hear what you have to say, Trojans fans, about your football team with 3 weeks left to go until opening day, right here on Mark Rogers TV.